Complexity versus simplicity. Expand on that. Why do you love the idea of simplicity in things that would otherwise seem to be really complex, or that others can make extremely complex?
Yeah, it's personal to me, meaning that it's my life and my experiences that essentially led me to really like that. Mm-hmm. I think that's the answer. But I'll explain what I mean by that. Up until this point in time, I recognized if you were to take a long-term approach or a long-term analysis of my learning of physical culture, okay? Let's just say if I had a brain that was worth anything in my mid-teens mm-hmm. till I'm 50. Okay, so take that long, timeline of 35 years. At first, physicality was extremely simple and beautiful because of the expression and the experiences, and the only thing you had to concern yourself with was showing up. That was the biggest thing, right? And then in that middle zone of the 35 years, it was very complex, ridiculously complex. I taught complexity. I fell in love with complexity. I made political moves to make money off complexity. And then through the experience of it, over time, I just feel that at getting to the back end of that, there is lots of regret, but tremendous amount of gratitude around the experience of going through all of the shenanigans of complexity to land on something that I feel pretty convicted about, or today I feel pretty convicted about, moving consistently every day. And knowing when you say something like that, I don't just sound like an old physical culture guy like we may have heard 30 years ago. Like I really mean it when I say that. Eat real food and learn all the time. That's pretty simple.
Yeah.
But it took a lot to get to that, right? So that's what I love about the...
And I was going to say, because you said that, and the reason why I asked the question is because it sparked something in me, because... And you answered it in that explanation. You used to teach complexity, because I remember a decade ago, wasn't that long ago, right? Mm-hmm. But a decade ago, that's how I looked at the way that you taught. But I think that's what attracted me to the way that you thought, right? Because mm-hmm. I was kind of in that season of life where I was I fell in love with digging deeper and making things more complex. And looking at it now, I think it's I think I had the answers. But I felt like I didn't feel good enough with the answers that I had. I don't know if that makes sense to you, James, but so I was there has to be more. We have to be able to dig deeper. Yeah. And I think that's I don't know, I wouldn't say don't do that, but at mm-hmm. what cost, right? So, just going through that process of, falling in love with the complexity on your side, mm-hmm. and then kind of taking a step back, and something that, a term that you used 2 years ago that stuck with me was if we scraped this, if we scrape that, if we scrape mm-hmm. that. So it's there's complexity in everything, right? Mm-hmm. If we get specific to fitness, right? There's a lot of complexity in improving someone's aerobic system. Mm-hmm. But do we have to understand that complexity deeply to actually improve someone's or our own aerobic systems? Or do we just scrape the data and we come out with a couple principles where we're just we'll just do a lot of really easy aerobic stuff, some of it outdoors, maybe most of it outdoors. And then maybe challenge yourself aerobically 1 time a week, maybe 2 times per week, and you're probably going to end up in really, really good shape. And you could have case study A that just follows that, and then case study B that just falls in love with the complexity and the nuance. Mm-hmm. And if I do this, my mitochondria is going to do that, or if I do that thing over there, it might increase my VO2 max by this amount of percentage points, and they might actually end up in the exact same place.
I think it's important to recognize that. When I mentioned regrets, in a different universe, I would have loved, along with that start of the complexity that I was teaching, to heal the you and I back in that picture, mm-hmm. Was for me to listen to the advice that was given to me, but I didn't pay attention. That's why I called it a political move that I made, right? Because it was a political move to make money, right? So I wish that I had listened to my forefathers in this area that said, be a critical thinker on not only what you're learning and how to think, but on what you're teaching people. And I think if you had come into that universe with me still teaching that, but I told you, really critically think about why I'm here, what I'm doing, what puts you in this seat, and why I'm telling you what I'm telling you. But I didn't front end it always with that. Secondly, I think the issue of your example, I have learned over time to back up and say, yeah, but maybe it's not a simple or complex thing. Maybe it's that we're asking the wrong question. Like, why does one need to improve their aerobic system? Do you see, that's even more simple than all the stories and all the experimentations and the arguing and stuff that goes on about mitochondrial thing or whatever.
But that's where a lot of people end up though, right? Like, because that question is being asked, right? It's like, why do any of it, right? Like, why lift weights? Why do aerobic work? Why should I care about this metric versus that metric? And I think that's what's actually opening the door right now to a lot more complexity, right? Because now we're starting to dig deep into mitochondrial density and what that actually means. And it's like, how do we get the lay person to understand how important their mitochondria is? That's when we start getting into all of the bone density increasing effects of resistance training. We start looking at tennis players. If they're swinging with their right arm over 20 years, it's like, oh my gosh, now that correlates to if we do resistance training, bone density increases because Andy Roddick has a massive amount of bone in his right arm, his right humerus compared to his left, right? Like, so I think the question, why are we even doing it? Why improve our aerobic system? I think that very, very quickly leads to a lot more complexity as well, because now we're starting to get into physiology. We're starting to get into disease, right? It's like, well, we do it to avoid dying, right? Like, we don't want to die right now, do we? We don't want to have type 2 diabetes. We want to have a very healthy cardiovascular system. And then how does that affect our metabolic rates, and how can that combat metabolic disease, and how could it improve our cardiovascular system? And then it goes down like the deep rabbit holes. And then you get like your Hubermans, right? Where it's just like, that guy seemingly makes a lot of complex things simple because of the people that he's discussing those things with. But I listen to that stuff and I'm just like, well, even the notion of even digging down that rabbit hole is almost fruitless in my opinion, because it opens up so many more questions, right? And then we start digging into, well, let me see the evidence, and let me see this, and let me see that. So not to completely disagree with the why question, but I think that's why we're leading into more complexity right now.
No, I think we have a disagreement in how we view it, and it's great that you brought up Huberman's example, because it highlights what I'm trying to say there, is that I guess maybe, so I am agreeing with you that it's possible that does go on, where you're going to have an increase in complexity because we're asking the questions on the intentions of why we're doing what we're doing. But I don't see it as that. That's where we're disagreeing. I see it as what you'll end up getting is people realizing that the whole thing is a show. That's what I mean. So I would have much rathered you 10 years ago in that class realizing it was a whole show. Realizing you really were gonna go out there and make things complex to people so that you could make money as a coach and make yourself feel good like you were smart. That's what I mean. So I would have liked the coach 10 years ago to have had the choice, right? To had the choice to leave and be like, listen, we know we're just selling this complex idea. We know people just have to walk and do some gymnastics and eat real food, and keep learning and be a critical thinker, et cetera, et cetera. But this is reality. this is what we have in front of us.
Yep. If you could go back to that classroom 10 years ago, what would you be teaching, and how does that compare to what you did teach?
Yeah, well,
let me say this, with the intention being that the coaches in that classroom went out and helped the people that they were working with to the greatest effect.
It's a hypothetical that I can't wrap my head around what that would be, because in that hypothetical world, I would want a full deconstruction of fitness. So if they ended up being in front of me, I would say to go out and be a radical health activist, i.e. like light Occupy Wall Street concept. Whatever you need to do to leave this room to rip the whole system down, to make people aware of the fact that they're being cudgeled into paying people to be dependent and actually being serfs to the whole fitness concept. That's what I think I'd probably do again, this is another universe hypothetical situation.
What are you teaching though? Like, what principles do you think you'd be teaching? Like, because this coach knows nothing about fitness. They're just like, I have people in front of me that...
I'd probably be teaching them nothing about fitness as we know it today. Mm-hmm. I'd probably be teaching them to be convicted in what the basics are, that every human in America had a right to, that academia and medical institutions and accreditation systems and all that started in the 70s, that got us to this point in 2014.
Yeah.
So then they would leave going, so what do we do? And some would say, well, he told you what you do. You just do weights one day, you do walking the next day, we eat real food, and we just keep learning about things.
Yep.
Right? And then what else do we do? Well, our job now is 30 years of radical. I call it radical because it'll be completely against the norm in this hypothetical universe.
Yeah. Yep.
A radical version of health activism.
Okay.
Right? It would be activism. It would be, and to make it like pertinent to our conversation, we'll just use Huberman as an example, right? Those people that were spit out in 2014, I love this idea, by the way, so I appreciate you giving me the concept. They're spit out. They would be nonstop online in a very cordial human interaction way, not vitriol or ad hominem attacks or et cetera, going after Huberman on making people actually more dependent on the medical system. They would go after the Peter Attias, which people listening now are like, what the hell? Like, how is that possible? A lot of people don't even see that those people have you captured, right? On ideas that lead you to what? Buy athletic greens, buy some biohack, right? Right? So they're dependent. They're dependent on the ideas, and all they're like, well, what? Be like, well, what are we gonna do? I already told you what we can do, and that's what these people would do. These activists would just preach the good word.
Preach the good word. Love it.